I was halfway through tightening a bolt when I heard the front door click, signaling him leaving for work. His boots faded down the hall, leaving the faint echo of hurried footsteps. I exhaled, trying to focus on the engine in front of me, but then I felt it. A presence, a weight beside me. "Stay a little longer," she murmured, sliding onto the stool I'd been leaning against. Her voice was soft, almost teasing, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't place. I swallowed, my hands gripping the wrench a little too tightly. I knew her reputation before ever meeting her properly. Confident, sharp, a woman who seemed to move through life knowing exactly how the world responded to her. But seeing her here, so casually close, made all the impressions I'd read about her crumble into something far more complicated. Her mid-40s elegance wasn't just in her posture or the precise way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was in the subtle tension she carried, a quiet awareness that she noticed everything. The way the light caught the scratches on the workbench, the faint smell of motor oil on my hands, the hesitation in my own voice when I spoke. I started, but the words caught somewhere between my throat and the air, awkward and unnecessary. She smiled slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to make it impossible to look away. The repair shop smelled of engine oil, gasoline, and the faint dust of forgotten parts. Normally, I'd let that keep me grounded, my hands working while my mind stayed elsewhere. But with her, the room shrank. Every metallic clang sounded louder. Every rusted tool glimmered like it was part of some quiet stage for us. She leaned just a fraction closer, brushing against my arm as she reached for a rag. It was such a small, unintentional gesture. I didn't think she even realized she had done it, but it sent a pulse through my chest I wasn't ready to name. My fingers trembled slightly when I handed her a small socket. My grip lingered longer than necessary. "Don't overthink it," she said softly, almost to herself, her eyes glinting in that peculiar mix of warmth and amusement. And I couldn't overthink it, because every nerve in me was screaming that this was something I hadn't experienced before. She looked at me then, really looked, with that slow, deliberate gaze that seemed to weigh every inch of me, not in judgment, but in a way that made me feel startlingly transparent. I realized my chest had been tight, my stomach fluttering, and I hadn't even breathed properly in what felt like minutes. Then she chuckled quietly, a sound so soft and natural it almost felt like it belonged to the dust in the air, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. "You know," she said, tilting her head slightly, "it's nice having someone who actually listens, even if you're just pretending." I wanted to protest that I wasn't pretending, but my voice faltered. I only managed to nod. That was all I could do. Nod and watch her fingers trace idle patterns on the counter, tracing lines that didn't exist, making everything in the room suddenly feel significant. She straightened, glanced toward the door as if considering leaving, then back at me with that half-smile that was impossibly small yet charged. And she said nothing more. She didn't have to, because when she finally walked past, leaving a faint scent of jasmine and faint leather behind, I realized I hadn't moved, couldn't move, and probably wouldn't be able to stop thinking about the way she had said those words. "Stay a little longer." Even now, hours later, the echo of it lingers, a whisper I can't shake, a hint of something unspoken, something dangerous, but impossible to ignore. I found her standing by the counter again, a stack of papers in one hand, a pen poised over a form she clearly didn't want to fill out. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, casting shadows that softened her sharp lines. I hesitated at the doorway, wrench still in my pocket, unsure if I was supposed to interrupt or simply drift back into my corner. "Need a hand?" I asked, trying to sound casual. My voice came out quieter than intended, and I noticed her pause, pen hovering midair. She looked at me, that subtle narrowing of her eyes that said she was weighing me, measuring whether I was worth letting close. "I don't usually bother anyone with this," she murmured. Her tone was clipped, but beneath it, there was a flicker of something softer, a hesitation I almost missed. I stepped closer anyway, letting my hands hang loose at my sides, careful not to crowd her space. "I mean, if it's too much, I can help." Even just holding the stack, my words stumbled over each other, because the truth was, I wanted to watch her. Observe. Learn the small movements that made her her. Her hands were elegant, though calloused in ways that told stories of effort and stubbornness. When she finally handed me the papers, our fingers brushed, the contact fleeting but electric, and she didn't pull away. Not immediately, anyway. You really don't have to, she said, a hint of fatigue threading through her voice. I noticed the subtle crease between her brows, the faint shadows under her eyes. She was tired, maybe more tired than she let anyone see. We worked in silence for a few minutes, my eyes constantly finding details. The curve of her jaw as she glanced down, the way her shoulders tensed whenever she concentrated, the almost imperceptible sigh she let out when a sheet slipped from the stack. I wanted to reach out, to smooth it, but I stopped myself, aware of the invisible line she had drawn around herself. Then she laughed, a quiet, almost self-conscious sound, at something I hadn't even realized was funny. It was brief, but it lingered, and I caught myself smiling without thinking. There was something human in it. Vulnerable. Real. She straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she handed me the last page. My chest tightened for reasons I couldn't name. She was guarded, yes, but not impenetrable. There were glimpses, fleeting, impossible to ignore glimpses, of someone who could let someone in. For a moment, we stood like that, almost touching, our shoulders brushing slightly, both aware of the quiet tension that had settled between us. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the counter, yet I could feel the electricity in the space we shared. Then she muttered, almost to herself, "Thanks for not asking too many questions." Her voice was soft, almost fragile, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, that I didn't care about the answers, only about being here, but the words wouldn't come. So I just nodded, letting the silence do the work. She finally moved to leave, but before she went, her hand brushed mine again, subtle and fleeting, a spark that made the room feel smaller, warmer. And in that simple gesture, I realized something undeniable. Whatever this was, whatever it might become, I was already caught. The rain had started again, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the tall windows of the workshop. I was wiping grease from my hands when she appeared, leaning against the counter, her hair damp at the ends. She didn't say anything at first, just watched the droplets race down the glass, and I realized I hadn't breathed properly in minutes. "Late night?" I said finally, trying to sound casual. My voice cracked slightly, betraying me. She shrugged, tucking her damp hair behind one ear. "I like the quiet. Helps me think." Her eyes flicked toward mine, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of us. The soft hum of fluorescent lights, the faint smell of motor oil, and the quiet, shared pulse of something unspoken. I stepped closer to hand her a towel. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second, enough to make me tense, enough to make her pause. She didn't pull away, though her eyes shifted, careful, measuring. I didn't expect you to stay this late," I murmured, fumbling for words that might carry some weight without sounding foolish. She smiled, small and almost fleeting, like she was hiding a thought behind a curtain. "I didn't either," she admitted. And then, softer, almost a whisper, "But sometimes it's nice when someone else is here." My chest tightened. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I let my eyes linger on her hands, tracing the delicate lines that contrasted with the faint calluses at her knuckles. I wanted to reach out, touch her shoulder, tell her I understood the exhaustion in her bones, but the space between us felt fragile, unspoken rules hanging in the air. The phone buzzed on the counter, sharp against the quiet. She glanced at it, hesitated, then let it ring. I caught the number flashing across the screen, recognized it immediately. Someone from her past, she clearly didn't want to speak to tonight. The interruption was a relief and a torment at the same time. I leaned against the counter, careful not to invade her space, aware of how close we were. I could see the subtle tension in her jaw, the way she fiddled with a loose strand of hair, the faint tremor in her fingers. Every detail screamed something I wasn't supposed to name. She finally silenced the phone and looked up at me, her gaze lingering longer than necessary. I wanted to step closer, wanted to close the tiny distance, but I held myself back, pretending to adjust my shirt. My pulse raced anyway. For a few seconds, we were suspended in that quiet storm, the world reduced to the sound of rain and the soft brush of our shoulders. It was a moment that could have tipped into something, a word, a touch, a confession. But we both stayed still, caught in restraint and a shared, unspoken understanding. Then she exhaled, a soft sound, and glanced toward the doorway. The tension broke with a faint click of the lock, the outside world intruding again. She straightened, gathering her things, leaving that spark dangling between us like a question I couldn't answer. And I stayed there, hand frozen on the counter, thinking about the warmth of her presence, the almost touch of her fingers, and how close we had come without ever crossing that line. I found her sitting at the far end of the workshop, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt heavier than usual, each flicker punctuating the quiet that had stretched between us for hours. I wanted to leave, wanted to pretend I hadn't noticed the tension, but something inside me refused. I cleared my throat, careful not to break the fragile calm. Are you okay?" My voice sounded smaller than I intended, almost swallowed by the stillness. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers drummed softly on the edge of the counter, a rhythm I couldn't match, a rhythm I couldn't predict. When she finally looked up, her eyes held something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty, a flicker of fear, and an honesty so raw it made my chest ache. I don't know what this is anymore," she said, voice low, almost a confession. I can't tell if it's just work or something else. And I'm not sure I want to know." I froze, caught between the urge to speak and the need to stay quiet. Her words were not about love, not yet, but they carried the same weight, the same dangerous gravity. I swallowed and nodded slowly, letting silence stretch between us, heavy and unyielding. I watched her fingers trace idle circles on the counter, watched the way her jaw clenched slightly when she forced a breath. She wasn't ready to let anyone in, and I wasn't sure I could wait patiently, but the honesty in her pause was intoxicating. "I hate that I think about you," she admitted, barely above a whisper, and I felt it as much as I heard it. Not love, not confession, but the confession of the chaos she carried silently. It made the space between us vibrate with something fragile, something dangerous, something entirely unsaid. I wanted to reach out, wanted to brush a hand against her arm, tell her that it was okay to feel whatever this was. But I didn't. I stayed still, letting the silence carry the weight of what she couldn't put into words. My own chest ached, a quiet pressure that matched hers, mirrored and impossible to ignore. "Sometimes," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "I wonder if I've made a mistake by letting you in at all. But then I think about how empty it would be if you weren't here." Her eyes found mine for a long, piercing moment. I wanted to say something, anything, to fill the gap, but I couldn't. Words would ruin it. Words always ruin it. We didn't move. We didn't speak. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the air heavy and damp. The only sound was the soft, uneven breathing that betrayed the calm we tried to hold. Finally, she whispered, almost as if saying it aloud made it less dangerous. "I don't know how much longer I can pretend this, whatever this is normal." And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. Neither of us could go back to pretending. The unspoken tension wasn't just there anymore. It had become real, sharp, and unavoidable. I stayed frozen, heart hammering, watching her gather her things. Every small movement weighted with unacknowledged emotion. Every glance a silent question I didn't know how to answer. And then, as she walked past me toward the door, she muttered, almost to herself, "I'm scared of what happens if we stop pretending." I didn't move. I couldn't. The words lingered between us like smoke, and I knew I wouldn't stop thinking about them. I was sorting through a pile of invoices when she appeared behind me, holding a small envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the counter. I noticed it immediately, The way her fingers lingered on the paper, the faint crease where she'd clutched it too tightly. "It's nothing important," she said quickly, but I caught the hesitation, the flicker of something heavy beneath her words. I didn't push. I just nodded, waiting. She sighed, long and quiet, and finally sat on the stool opposite me. I haven't talked about this with anyone in years," she admitted, voice low, almost afraid to be heard. "It's from him, from before. My husband. Or ex, I guess. He left. And sometimes I still feel it, like a shadow I can't shake." I swallowed, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. Her eyes didn't meet mine at first. They stayed fixed on the envelope, tracing invisible lines, like she could read the past through its edges. "I kept thinking I was over it," she continued, softer now, almost confessional. "I mean, I survived, obviously, but there are nights I still wake up, thinking about the things I didn't say, the moments I lost. And sometimes," she paused, lip trembling slightly, "sometimes I feel like I'll never really get past it." I wanted to tell her it was okay, that she wasn't alone, but the words felt too big, too clumsy. Instead, I let my eyes find the subtle things, the way her hands flexed over the envelope, the tiny shiver in her shoulders, the quiet tremor in her jaw. She was opening herself, and it was both terrifying and beautiful to witness. "I didn't expect anyone to care anymore," she added finally, a bitter edge in her voice that softened almost immediately. "And yet, here you are, pretending it doesn't matter, pretending it's all ordinary." Her gaze found mine then, fleeting but unflinching, and I realized she wasn't just speaking about the past. She was speaking about us. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. I didn't have the right words, not yet. So I simply nodded, letting her fill the silence with what she needed to say, letting her unburden herself without interruption. For a moment, we sat like that, both aware of the quiet tremor beneath ordinary gestures, the unspoken currents between us. And then she did something unexpected. She handed me the envelope. "Read it," she whispered, a fragile challenge in her voice. My hands shook slightly as I took it. Inside, a folded letter, faded ink, words I couldn't quite place without feeling the weight of her history. And as I read, a soft realization struck me. The heartbreak she carried wasn't just hers. It had shaped every glance, every pause, every careful smile. She watched me carefully, almost afraid, and I understood that in letting me see this, she was testing me, measuring whether I would stay or retreat. My heart thumped in response, louder than it should, and I realized I didn't want to retreat. She exhaled softly, shoulders sagging with relief and exhaustion. "It's silly," she murmured, almost apologetic. "I shouldn't have, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." And as the words hung between us, delicate yet seismic, I felt a shift, a quiet tremor, the kind that moves everything without warning. I didn't know what it meant exactly, only that I couldn't stop looking at her, couldn't stop thinking about the vulnerability she'd just entrusted me with. The envelope lay between us, fragile, and so did everything else. The workshop was quieter than usual that evening, the world outside fading under a soft gray sky. We were side by side at the counter, neither of us speaking, just sorting through the scattered tools and papers from the day. The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt warm instead of harsh, filling the space between us without words. I noticed her hand resting lightly on the edge of the counter, fingers brushing against mine as we reached for the same wrench. Neither of us moved away. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. She didn't flinch. She just adjusted her stance slightly, her eyes catching mine for the fraction of a second that made the air feel heavier. "I didn't think I'd let anyone in like this again," she said softly, voice low, almost confessional. I kept my gaze on her hands, the delicate way her fingers flexed around the metal, the faint tremor that betrayed her calm exterior. "Not after everything." I nodded slowly, understanding more than she could know. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I didn't care about the past, that I only cared about the present, about this quiet, fragile space we were sharing. But words felt too blunt, too loud. So I stayed silent, letting the quiet speak for us. We worked together in that gentle rhythm, passing tools back and forth, side by side, each gesture deliberate and careful. There was no rush, no performance, just two people who had finally arrived at the point where pretense was impossible. Then, without thinking, I let my fingers brush against hers again, intentionally this time. She didn't pull away. Her hand lingered just slightly longer than necessary, a small acknowledgement that she felt it too. That tiny, fragile contact said more than words ever could. Her gaze lifted to mine, soft and unguarded, and I saw something in her expression: acceptance, relief, maybe even quiet gratitude. No grand declarations, no dramatic confessions, just the shared understanding that neither of us wanted to leave this space. Not yet, not ever. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence was enough. Every glance, every micro-movement, every brush of hands built the kind of connection that wasn't rushed or forced. It was earned, fragile, and profoundly human. I finally leaned slightly closer, enough for my forehead to rest near hers as we sorted the last of the tools. It wasn't a gesture of passion. It was a gesture of trust, of acknowledgement, of quiet surrender to what had grown between us without either of us fully realizing it. Her breath mingled with mine, soft and steady, and I felt the tension of the past weeks, months even, dissolve into something gentle, inevitable. We were no longer pretending. We were here, together, and that was enough. When the last tool clinked into place, we pulled back slightly, our hands still brushing, our eyes meeting in a look that held everything we didn't need to say. The world outside could wait. The storm, the noise, the questions, all of it could wait. She finally exhaled, a soft, quiet sound, and I mirrored it. The weight between us had shifted, subtle but absolute. And in that shared, fragile silence, I realized something. We had arrived. No words were necessary. No promises made. Just the quiet, undeniable acknowledgement that this was ours, however imperfect, however delayed, however human. It's been months since that evening in the workshop, the night when everything we hadn't said finally started to breathe between us. I still remember the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the soft brush of her fingers against mine, and the quiet weight of shared silence that somehow said more than words ever could. Since then, things have changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but irrevocably. I notice the way she smiles at small, ordinary moments now, the flicker of warmth that she used to hide behind her guarded demeanor. She trusts more easily, lets herself linger just a little longer in places where she used to leave quickly. And me? I've learned to listen, really listen, not just to her words, but to the pauses, the glances, the micro-behaviors that speak volumes. I've learned patience, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't rush. I've learned that some connections aren't about fireworks or declarations. They're about quiet understanding, the kind that grows steadily until it feels inevitable. Our bond isn't perfect. It's messy, human, full of hesitation and small missteps. But that's what makes it ours. I know now that love doesn't have to be shouted to be felt. Sometimes it's just a touch, a glance, a shared cup of coffee that stretches into silence, and a simple acknowledgement that we're both here, fully present. Sometimes I catch her watching me when she thinks I'm not looking. Sometimes I linger a moment longer than necessary, just to feel the warmth of proximity. Those small moments are everything. The quiet proof that we've survived our pasts, our fears, and somehow found each other anyway. I've realized that love like this, slow, careful, earned, changes you in ways that don't always make headlines. It softens edges, it teaches patience, it reshapes the world so that ordinary days feel extraordinary. And it leaves an imprint you carry quietly, without needing anyone else to see. So here I am, months later, remembering that evening, remembering her whisper, her laugh, her vulnerability, and I smile. Because even without grand gestures or dramatic confessions, something real, lasting, and impossible to forget has taken root. And as I sit here, telling this story, I can only hope that you, whoever is listening, reading, watching, feel a little of what I felt that night. That you understand that connection isn't always about the rush. Sometimes, it's about the quiet moments, the almost touch, the unspoken acknowledgement that someone else sees you, truly sees you. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?